In 1963, a farm family in Tennessee might spend 4 hours a day inside their own house. Everything else happened on the porch, in the field, or down at the creek. Today, the average American spends nearly 11 hours a day looking at a screen. But here is the part nobody talks about. Number 12 on this list was so ordinary that nobody thought to photograph it, and now there is almost no record it existed at all. And number 3 required 20 neighbors to show up without being asked, something no app has ever managed to arrange. These 25 pleasures cost almost nothing. Most of them cost nothing at all. That is exactly why they vanished. You cannot sell a man something he already has. Hit subscribe, because a few of these you can still get back. Let's count down, starting with number 25. Number 25, the party line telephone. Before private lines reached the back roads, half a county shared a single circuit, and every household had its own ring pattern. 2 shorts and a long meant the Hendersons. 3 shorts meant you. In 1962, rural telephone cooperatives were still stringing wire down section roads where the poles ended in a cornfield, and a party line ran about $3 a month against 6 or 7 for a private one. Everybody listened in. That was understood. When a woman lifted the receiver to call the feed store, she heard breathing on the line and said good morning to it. Neighbors learned about a new baby, a broken leg, or a fire out on the ridge in the time it took to pick up a handset. Children were warned not to tie up the line in case somebody needed the doctor. It was gossip, yes. It was also a county-wide nervous system nobody had to build. Number 24, riding in the bed of a pickup truck. There was no better seat in America than the wheel well of a Ford F-100 headed to town on a gravel road. Children rode standing up with their hands on the cab roof, hair whipping straight back, watching the dust boil out behind them in a long tan rope. Grandparents rode facing backward on an overturned bucket. A trip to the elevator became an event. Nobody wore a seatbelt because there was nothing to buckle to, and every family had a story about somebody who slid across the bed on a hard turn and laughed about it for 40 years. Farmers hauled 6 kids, 2 dogs, and a hog panel in the same load. By the 1980s, state after state wrote the practice out of the law books, and rightly so. But something specific went with it: the feeling of moving through open country with nothing between you and the sky. Number 23, the Sears Christmas Wish Book. It arrived in the mailbox in early fall, 600 pages thick, and the year effectively began when it landed. Sears had been mailing the Christmas catalog since 1933, and by the 1960s it ran to nearly 400 pages of toys alone. Children lay on their stomachs on a linoleum floor for entire evenings, turning pages, folding down corners, writing initials next to the radio flyer wagon or the Daisy Air rifle so that no sibling could claim it later. Mothers used it to order coats and boots that arrived by parcel post at the Crossroads store. Fathers pretended not to notice which pages were worn soft. The waiting was the pleasure. 6 weeks of imagining one particular thing you might not even get. Today, a child can see 10,000 products in 10 seconds and want none of them for longer than a minute. Number 22, burning leaves in October. Every small town in America smelled the same in the 3rd week of October, and anyone who lived through it can still summon that smell instantly. Fathers raked maple and hickory leaves into the gutter along the road, struck a kitchen match, and stood there with a garden rake, tending it like a small ceremony. The The smoke hung low in the cold air and drifted down the whole street. Children were allowed to help, meaning they were allowed to poke it. Potatoes went into the coals, wrapped in foil, and came out blackened and steaming. Neighbors came out to lean on their own rakes and talk across the property line because the fire gave them a reason to be outside at the same time. Clean air ordinances ended the practice through the 1970s and the 80s for perfectly good reasons, but an entire American smell went out with it. Number 21, the penny candy counter. The general store kept it at child height on purpose, in glass jars with tin lids, and a nickel bought serious negotiation. Mary Janes, root beer barrels, wax bottles with syrup inside, Bitto honey, and the little paper strips of candy buttons that always came with paper stuck to the back. A child sent to the store with a dime for their mother's thread could be trusted with the 3 cents change and would stand at that counter for 10 full minutes, making a decision that felt enormous. The storekeeper waited. He had time. He also knew the child's grandfather and would mention the visit next time the family came in. That was the whole transaction. A small amount of money, a large amount of consideration, and an adult who was not in a hurry. The candy still exists. The counter and the patience do not. Number 20, sheets dried on the line. There is a smell that no detergent company has ever successfully bottled, though several have spent millions trying. It came from cotton sheets hung on a wire line in a March wind, sun and moving air, working on damp fabric for 4 hours. Women hung wash by a system. Sheets on the outside lines to shield the personal items on the inner ones, everything pinned by the hems, wooden clothespins carried in an apron pocket or a cloth bag sliding along the wire. In winter, the sheets froze stiff as plywood and came in the house standing up on their own. Children were sent out to help fold, walking toward their mother with corners in hand, then away, then toward again in a kind of quiet dance. That night, the whole bed smelled like weather. An electric dryer does the job in 40 minutes and cannot do that. Number 19, lightning bugs in a mason jar. Around the 4th of July, the pasture would start blinking at dusk, low over the grass, thousands of them, and every child in the county was outside. The equipment was a pint jar from the canning shelf, a lid punched through with a nail, and a handful of grass laid in the bottom because somebody's grandmother insisted they needed it. A good hour's work produced a lantern bright enough to read a comic book by, held under the covers after bedtime. The rule in most houses was absolute. You let them go before you went to sleep. So the last act of a summer night was carrying the jar to the porch steps, unscrewing the lid, and watching the light lift away in pieces. Fireflies are measurably fewer now in much of the country. Even where they remain, the children are inside. Here is where it stops being about objects. Number 18, hand-cranked ice cream on the porch. It took an hour, and it took everybody. Somebody chipped the block ice with an awl. Somebody else layered rock salt around the canister in the wooden bucket. Then the cranking began, and it was passed down the line as arms gave out, from the uncle to the older cousins to the 8-year-old who could still turn it easily, which meant it was nowhere near done. When the handle got hard enough that a grown man had to sit on the freezer to hold it steady, it was close. The dasher came out coated, and whoever had cranked longest got to lick it. Custard made from that morning's cream, peaches from the tree by the smokehouse. A bucket cost a few dollars and lasted 30 years. You can buy a pint tonight in 90 seconds, and no one will remember eating it. Number 17, the Sunday drive with no destination. Gasoline ran about 31 cents a gallon in 1965, and on Sunday afternoon, a family would simply get in the car and go to look at the country. No plan. Fathers drove slowly with an elbow out the window, evaluating other men's crops out loud. Mothers pointed out a house they had always admired. Children counted cows, watched for the first sight of the river, and fell asleep in the back seat with the windows down. There was often no stop at all and nothing purchased. The point was to see how the corn was coming, whether the Petersons had finally painted the barn, and how the light looked on the fields at 5 in the afternoon. Driving is now something we do between two places, measured in minutes and traffic. The idea of a trip whose entire purpose is the trip has quietly died. Number 16. The drive-in movie. At the height of the era, there were more than 4,000 drive-in screens in America, most of them on the edge of small towns where land was cheap. A carload cost about $1. Families arrived at dusk in pajamas, backed the station wagon in, and dropped the tailgate with quilts and pillows piled in the back. The metal speaker hooked over the window glass and buzzed. The concession stand had an animated dancing hot dog counting down to showtime. Half the children were asleep before the second feature. Teenagers had their entire social lives in the 4th row from the back. The projection was mediocre, the sound was worse, and the mosquitoes were serious. It did not matter, because you were outdoors, under actual stars, with your whole family in a car, watching something together. Fewer than 300 drive-ins are left standing. Number 15, visiting without calling first. This one is genuinely gone, and it went almost without anyone noticing. On a Sunday afternoon, people simply drove over. They pulled into the yard, and the woman of the house came out drying her hands on a towel, and everybody sat on the porch for 2 hours. Coffee got made. A cake that existed for exactly this purpose came out of the pie safe. Nobody had announced anything, nobody had confirmed, and nobody was inconvenienced because an unfilled afternoon was the normal condition of life. Oral histories from rural counties across the South and Midwest described the same rhythm. You knew who was likely to come. You kept the front room decent, and you were never annoyed. Now, an unannounced visitor triggers something close to alarm. We gained privacy and scheduling. We lost the ordinary, unearned company of other people. Number 14. Cane pole fishing at the creek. A 12-foot bamboo pole cost about $1 at the hardware store, and some families cut their own from a cane brake for nothing. Line was tied straight to the tip. A cork bobber, a split shot, a hook, and a coffee can of worms dug from behind the barn. A boy could leave the house at 7 in the morning with that and be gone until supper, and no one worried because the creek was where boys were. The pleasure was mostly in the waiting, the cork sitting still on brown water. Dragonflies, the specific sound of a slow creek moving over gravel. A stringer of bluegill went home to be rolled in cornmeal and fried in an iron skillet. Modern fishing has become a $5,000 boat and 11 rods. The cane pole asked for $1 and an entire unhurried day and gave back more. Number 13. The swimming hole. Every rural community had one, and it belonged to nobody. A bend in the river where the current cut deep, a rope hung off a sycamore limb, a rock ledge worn smooth by 50 years of bare feet. Nobody sold tickets, nobody posted hours. There was no lifeguard, only the 14-year-olds who had been coming the longest and enforced the rules by tradition. The water was cold at the bottom and warm on top. Children learned to swim by being thrown in by a cousin, which is not recommended and was universal. Afterward, everyone lay on the hot rock like turtles until they dried. liability law, private property fencing, and the drift of families toward town closed most of these places by the 1980s. A backyard pool is safer, cleaner, and completely unlike it because a swimming hole belonged to the whole county. Number 12, shelling peas on the porch. Now we get to the ones that took a village. This is the one nobody photographed because it was too ordinary to be worth film. On a June evening, 3 generations sat on the porch with a bushel basket of purple hull peas between them and a dishpan in every lap. It took 2 hours. Hands worked without being watched, thumbs running the seam, peas rattling into the pan in a sound like rain starting. And because the hands were busy and the eyes were free, people talked. This was where children heard about the flu year, the uncle who went to Detroit, why 2 families down the road had not spoken since 1938. Family history moved from one generation to the next during shared, boring, necessary work. Frozen vegetables ended the chore in the 1970s. They also ended the 2-hour window where a grandmother told you who you came from. Number 11, trading eggs at the country store. A farm wife walked in with 3 dozen eggs in a basket and walked out with coffee, sugar, and thread, and cash barely entered into it. The storekeeper kept a ledger with a page for every family, credited the eggs, subtracted the goods, and carried a balance from month to month with no interest and no paperwork. In 1961, eggs ran roughly 30 to 40 cents a dozen at wholesale, and a good flock of hens covered a family's dry goods. Butter, cream, and blackberries worked the same way. The system ran on the storekeeper knowing exactly who was good for it, which he did because he had known them for 30 years. It was credit built entirely on character. When supermarkets and cash-only pricing arrived, the ledger closed, and a woman with hens found she had nothing the store wanted. Number 10, Saturday night radio. At 8 o'clock on Saturday, WSM out of Nashville pushed the Grand Ole Opry across half the continent on 50,000 watts of clear channel signal, and farmhouses from Georgia to the Dakotas tuned in on the same night. The set was a big console in the front room, and everybody stopped. Fathers sat with their shoes off. Children lay on the rug in front of the speaker. When the reception drifted, somebody was sent to adjust the aerial wire. There was something powerful in knowing that 100,000 other kitchens were hearing the exact same fiddle at the exact same second. Later at night, if the atmosphere was right, you could pull in stations from Texas or Chicago, faint and swimming, a signal from a place you would never go. We have every song ever recorded now, and no one is listening to it at the same time. Number 9, dinner on the grounds. After the third Sunday service, the tables went up outside under the oaks, sawhorses and planks covered with oilcloth, and every woman in the congregation carrying a covered dish she was quietly known for, fried chicken in a dish towel-lined roaster, deviled eggs on a carrying plate with a fitted lid, congealed salads, coconut cake, banana pudding in a glass bowl, gallon jars of sweet tea sweating in the shade. Children were fed at a low table and released. Men stood in a knot by the cars with their coats off. Old people were seated first and served by teenagers. It was potluck, but it was also the only reliable moment each month when a scattered rural community physically stood in the same place. Church attendance patterns changed, families moved, and the plank tables came down. Number 8, the county fair. For 1 week in August, the entire population of a rural county was in one place. A boy walked a steer he had raised from a calf into a ring, and learned in 90 seconds what a year of work was worth. Women who had spent their lives cooking without any recognition at all had their green beans and their blackberry jam judged by strangers and pinned with a purple ribbon. The 4-H building smelled like sawdust and hay. There was a midway with a Ferris wheel that a man had assembled that morning with a wrench, a grandstand, and a tractor pull that shook the bleachers. Prize money was small, $10 or $15. It was never about the money. It was the single occasion when ordinary rural competence was displayed publicly and applauded. County fairs survive, but the county that filled them mostly does not. Number 7, canning season. By late July, the kitchen was 95 degrees and everyone was in it. Bushels of tomatoes came in from the garden at daylight. Water bath canners boiled on every burner. Children scalded and slipped skins, packed jars, and carried them to the cellar. The sound of a lid sealing with a sharp pop as it cooled was a genuine satisfaction, and women counted the pops. A good year meant 600 quarts on the cellar shelves. Tomatoes, green beans, corn, peaches, chow chow, apple butter cooked outside in a copper kettle. That wall of glass was the family's insurance policy for the winter, and everyone knew it. Standing in the cellar in January with a lamp, looking at what you had put up, was a feeling of security no bank statement duplicates. Home canning collapsed after the 1960s. So did the feeling. Number 6, the first watermelon out of the creek. Melons went into the spring branch or the stock tank in the morning to cool, wedged between rocks in water that ran 58 degrees straight out of the ground. By mid-afternoon, when the heat was flat and heavy and the work stopped, somebody waded in and carried one up to the yard. It was split on a stump with a pocket knife, cut in wedges, and eaten standing up with juice running to the elbow and seeds spit into the grass, which nobody scolded anyone for because you were outside. The cold of it against that particular heat was the entire point. A refrigerator gets a melon colder, and it is not the same because there is no walk to the creek, no waiting all day, and no reason for 8 people to be standing in the yard together at 4 in the afternoon. Number 5, sledding the Pasture hill. The first real snow shut everything down, and every child within 2 miles converged on whoever had the best slope. Equipment was improvised and fiercely defended, a flexible flyer if you were lucky, otherwise a car hood, a grain scoop, a piece of tin roofing, or a feed sack that worked once. The hill developed a packed track by noon and got faster all afternoon. Somebody always went into the fence. Fathers came out at dusk and made one run to show they still could. Then everyone crowded into one kitchen with wet wool steaming on the stove door and drank cocoa made with real milk. Snow days still happen, but the hill belonged to somebody's grandfather. The children were unsupervised for 6 hours, and nobody's mother knew exactly where they were, and that was completely normal. Number 4, the barn dance. Somebody cleaned out a hay barn, somebody swept the floor and spread cornmeal on it to make it slick, and word went around at church. A fiddle, a guitar, an upright bass, occasionally a mandolin, all played by men who farmed all week. There was no admission and no advertising. Old men sat along the wall and watched. Toddlers slept on coats piled in a corner. A caller ran the sets, and everyone from 12 to 80 was expected to get up, which meant every child in the county learned to dance with adults, and every adult danced with children. Couples met there and married. That was the point, though nobody said so. Live music made by your actual neighbors for free in a building meant for hay. Recorded music replaced it almost entirely, and the fiddlers stopped teaching anybody. Number 3, neighbors putting up hay. This is the one that required 20 men to appear without being asked. When the hay was cut and the weather was turning, word traveled the party line, and by 7 in the morning there were trucks in the field. Small square bales, 60 pounds each, thrown by hand up onto a wagon and stacked into a barn loft in 90-degree heat and hay dust. 2,000 bales in a day was a normal figure. Nobody was paid. Nobody wrote anything down. The women brought dinner to the field at noon, fried chicken, and a washtub of iced tea, and the men ate in the shade of the wagon. The following week, the whole crew moved to the next farm. It was not charity, it was not a favor, and it was not optional. It was simply how the country worked, and it built the deepest obligations most of those families ever had. Big round balers arrived in the 1970s, and one man with a tractor replaced 20. The hay got baled. The crew never assembled again. Number 2, being called into supper. At dusk, somebody stepped onto the back step and called your name across the field, and the sound carried 300 yards over standing corn. That was the signal, and it worked on the whole family. Everyone was expected, everyone came, and everyone sat at the same table at the same time, 6 nights out of 7, for 18 straight years. The food was from the garden and the smokehouse. Hands were washed at the pump on the porch. Somebody said, "Grace," and the conversation was not remarkable in the least. Weather, the price of hogs, who was sick, what the preacher said, that was the value. The ordinariness of it, repeated thousands of times, is what made a family a family. The average American household now eats together fewer than 4 nights a week, and rarely at the same time. And number 1, the dark and everything you could hear in it. After the dishes, before there was anything else to do, the whole family went out on the porch and sat down in the dark. No light for a mile except a yard bulb somebody chose not to turn on. The stars came out completely, the whole band of the Milky Way visible from a porch swing in a way that 80% of Americans can no longer see from where they live. Whip-poor-wills started up in the tree line, frogs from the pond, a dog 2 farms over, a train somewhere. Nobody performed. Nobody entertained anybody. Grandparents told the same 3 stories in the same order, and everyone let them. Children fell asleep against an adult and were carried in. It cost nothing and required nothing, and it was the single most common evening in rural America. It is the one thing on this list nobody has managed to sell back to us. That is the list, and here is the thing they all share. Not one of them required money, and almost everyone required other people. That is exactly why they went. Convenience did not steal them from us. We traded them one at a time for something faster. So tell me in the comments which one you would take back. The porch after dark, the hay crew, the party line, the creek, and if your family did something I missed, put it down there too, because half of this only survives now because somebody typed it out. Somebody in your family still remembers all of this. Go ask them this week.